All right, welcome all. Thank you for attending our virtual candidates night. We have a nice audience participating. We will also be recording the event so that we can put it up on Facebook Live and on our website so that we can make sure all the voters in the district are aware of our candidates and their positions. So we're going to start tonight with our candidate for the Ohio Supreme Court, Judge Jennifer Brunner. Actually, I don't believe that Judge Brunner needs much of an introduction, but I will say that she is a candidate for the Ohio Supreme Court. She is currently a judge on the Ohio 10th District Court of Appeals, and she is our previous Secretary of State from 2007 to 2011. She is running against current Justice on the Supreme Court, Judith French, and we all wish we had her back as our Secretary of State during this crucial election in 2020.
Amen.
We will elect her to the Ohio Supreme Court. And without further ado, Jennifer, if you would give your opening statement, please.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for sponsoring this event tonight. I'm Judge Jennifer Brunner of the Ohio 10th District Court of Appeals, and I'm a candidate for the Ohio Supreme Court for the term beginning January 2nd, 2021. Janet, are we getting a little bit of feedback there? Okay, I think it's corrected now. Great. So pleased to be joining you. Janet, what do you want in terms of an opening statement? How long do you want me to go?
I would say maybe 3 or 4 minutes.
I can manage that just fine, no problem.
Right.
So for people who aren't familiar with my background, I'll just give you a quick overview and then I'll tell you why I'm running. I am currently, as I said, on the 10th District Court of Appeals, serving since November of 2014, so I'm coming up on 6 years very shortly here. Before that, I have 17 years of private practice experience in a law firm that I started in the corner of my bedroom when my kids were 7, 4, and 2, plus a little bit of time for a Cleveland law firm that had a Columbus office. In serving as Secretary of State, I loved the work. I had wonderful staff, and we were recognized for our work and through the award of the John F. Kennedy Profile and Courage Award for the 2008 presidential election, doing everything possible to protect Ohio voters' votes. Before that, I served as a common pleas court judge in Franklin County for nearly 5 years, starting our adult felony drug court, which is still in operation today. And I would say that really taught me a huge lesson about public service, understanding that if an elected official is willing to stick their neck out, do the extra work, and empower the people around them, that you can change lives for the better and use that time that you've been given to serve very wisely. And it makes a difference, and it gets you pretty hooked on public service. It's what I want to do for the rest of the time that I'm able to work. I have served our U.S. government through the State Department as a rule of law expert in Egypt, Sri Lanka, and also in the Republic of Serbia. So I've worked on anti-corruption issues as well as judicial reform. I've observed 3 Egyptian elections, and I've taught at the Bar Association in Sri Lanka. And from this, I've learned that rule of law is something that judges are in the best position to protect for the confidence of the electorate in their government, not just the judiciary, but also in their government. And so I've been happy in the 10th District Court of Appeals because that court is a little like the DC Circuit in terms of having statewide reach because of the administrative issues that come through state government through that court. But looking ahead at 2021, we have the opportunity to get rid of gerrymandering in Ohio. We will be drawing the district lines for Congress and the state legislature next year. The Supreme Court is the designated body to review any challenges to that and to make sure that those district maps reflect what the people have stated in the Constitution, which is fair districts that represent a commonality of community and are not aligned to be for partisan interests. There's not a Republican or a Democratic way to be fair. What's fair is fair, and that's what I care about. Also, since the death of George Floyd and so many before him, I see where the Ohio Supreme Court is in a position to identify racism in our criminal justice system and begin to implement strategies to eliminate racism for fairness, equality, and respect for all. Those are the tenets that I see as important to public service. Those are the values I'll be walking into that courtroom with from day one, and I look to carry that forward for as long as I'm able to serve, which, because I'm running this year, would allow me to serve for 2 full terms if the voters saw fit to retain me. So thank you so much for the opportunity to speak, and I look forward to any questions you may have.
Okay. So perfect. We have a few questions to start out with. And I think that the first one would be, can you give us a quick reason, I think you may have already said, why you're running for the Ohio Supreme Court, and why should the voters elect you over your opponent?
Well, my experience is going to inform my judgment as well as my loyalty to the rule of law. You see, having served in the trial court, having looked someone in the eye who it's my job to sentence to a term of incarceration that for some people meant that they would never get out, is not an easy thing to do. And I've had to look into the eyes of those families who were, whose victim was affected or is no longer here, and also the family of the person who I'm sentencing. And I've had to understand how this affects the community. And at the end of a tough sentencing, I've had to say words that the media would pick up that would help the community understand what the justice system is doing. And in some cases would sort of soothe the fears of the community as well. My opponent doesn't have that experience. And the work that I've done in the Court of Appeals has allowed me to see all of that from another vantage point. But at the same time, I'm a real person. I've got 3 children who are married. I have 6 grandchildren. I've been married to my husband for 42 years. I've had foster children. I've worked at everything from a sales clerk at Sears when I was in high school to, as I said, the work that I've done overseas, where I had to be very cognizant of my presence there, what it meant, and what I represented for the US government. All of these things go to a person's judgment, so that while they're adhering to the rule of law, they're also bringing a perspective, a compassion, and the drive for the public to have trust in that system and to fashion decisions under the rule of law in such a way that the public will have faith in that system. So thank you very much for that question, and I won't go on any longer, although I probably could.
Thank you very much, Judge Brunner. Can you tell us one unknown or unique fact about yourself that would make you the best person for your office?
Well, there are a lot of unknown facts, of course, but I talked about that experience and that perspective, and I think the fact that I've been able to do the work overseas and look at our system from afar has helped me understand the role from a societal standpoint that rule of law plays in our society. When I was working in Serbia, I was helping the anti-corruption agency roll out a new kind of campaign finance monitoring that didn't deal with how much money was spent, but was based on the activities of the various political parties and coalitions. And so the monitors were actually going out and clocking and documenting how many people seemed to be appearing at a rally, how many rallies there were, how many pieces of literature they were using. And in that process, we had to actually roll this out around the country to the media, so that the media understood this new system. And I remember one of the members of the media said, well, tell us about corruption in the state of Ohio, because Ohio is even more people than Serbia, 11.5 as opposed to 8.5. And I started telling them about the big FBI sting in 2008 that involved judges and so forth. And they said, you're as bad as we are. And I said, oh no, we prosecute. So I think that helped me understand that people need confidence in the rule of law. And when that happens, they're not going to be as likely to tolerate the kind of corruption such as what's been unfolding in the prosecution of the Ohio House Speaker and the lobbyists and those who were involved with him. Again, everyone's innocent unless and until proved guilty. But the evidence that's been out there, I know, has alarmed some people.
Thank you. We have another question from the audience. What are the issues that are coming up in the next Ohio Supreme Court term? What issues do you see coming up?
The biggest issue, I think, that's front and center is going to be any review of a challenge to districts that end up being gerrymandered. And gerrymandering is essentially that the districts don't have a compact, if you overlaid it over a community, they may stretch with a part of a community and go into other areas, and they're drawn in such a way that it's the politicians selecting their voters instead of the voters selecting their elected officials. Because they've drawn those, they're essentially rigged so that one party or another can win that election, and it's almost impossible for the other party to win it. If you look at Marcy Kaptur's district for Congress, and it starts in Toledo and it snakes across the lake over into Cleveland, or you look at Jim Jordan's district that looks actually like a duck. Those are gerrymandered districts, and that came from a governor a long time ago in Massachusetts named Elbridge Gerry, who instituted that practice, and one of the districts looked like a salamander, so they put gerry and salamander together, and we got this term gerrymandering. If you think of Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie, when they called them Brangelina, that's how they came up with the term. So that's a big issue. But I've also heard a lot of voters talk about school funding and the constitutionality of it, and they're dissatisfied with the way that the DeRolf case ended a couple decades ago. And that case is gone, but it seems that people are looking for some kind of a challenge to have the court look at this issue again. And one of the questions that comes up is, how does the Supreme Court hold the legislature accountable? And that will depend upon how the case is brought, if it's brought. And the last three things I want to bring up is there are issues that affect everyone, such as search and seizure. When can a police officer make you get out of your car? When can they search it? When can they detain you? When can they arrest you based on reasonable suspicion or probable cause? Or what about foreclosures? Can a bank take your house, even if you haven't made your payments, if they haven't shown the court a complete chain of title? And then the last issue is expungement. That means someone who's been in the criminal justice system, who's been rehabilitated, haven't committed a crime of violence, have been successfully able to show that they've met all the requirements, including that their interests outweigh the interests of the state in keeping that record open. So that allows them to seal their criminal record so that they won't have a felony on their record. It's important that the Supreme Court look at the changes in the statute and make sure that we're recognizing that when the requirements are met, the word is shall and not may, and no longer should we be calling it a privilege, but that it's a right for people who've earned it. So those are the kinds of things that the Supreme Court, with a matter of a few sentences, can do that affect people's lives in very significant ways.
All right. Thank you very much, Jennifer. That's a very great explanation. Do we have any questions from our audience here at headquarters? Any other questions for Judge Brunner?
Yes, Janet.
Yes, Glenn.
Yes, I'm just curious.
You can't hear me?
No, we've all heard the news about, how the census has been halted 2 weeks early. And that, as Jennifer was talking about, that plays to the gerrymandering of districts. Will this be an opportunity for states or injured parties who now may be underrepresented have some sort of case going forward? Or is it just a federal issue and they can change the date without any recourse?
Glenn, thank you for the question. From everything I can see at this point, it's a federal issue. and that it would be up to the federal courts to deal with that, or it may make its way to the U.S. Supreme Court. I'm not certain.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Judge Brunner. We're looking forward to calling you Justice Brunner. And
Thank you.
your time this evening. All right. If no other questions, we're going to move on now to our next candidate that will be speaking. Candidate for Congress, Hillary O'Connor Mueri. Most of you know Hillary's background. She's a retired Navy combat veteran, and she's also an engineer and an attorney. She moved back here to Ohio in order to give us representation in Congress in the district that David Joyce currently represents. So we're very pleased to hear from her tonight and very happy she's joining us. Hillary, would you like to make an opening statement?
Thank you so much, Janet, and thank you everyone for being here. I say it every time, but I really mean it. It's an honor that you've decided to use your time to be here. There's so many other things you could be doing with your evening. The fact that you prioritize our democracy is just hugely inspiring to me, so thank you. I'm a fourth generation Ohioan. I was born in Parma and raised in Painesville in a house that my parents still live in today. I had a very typical blue collar childhood. My dad was a welder and my mom a teacher. So we had a mix of good times and the economically insecure ones. I went on to study aviation and engineering at Ohio State on scholarship, and then went on from there to become to my naval career. Up until I was 22, Ohio was the only thing I ever knew, but duty called, and so that's why I joined the Navy. I flew F-14s, F-A-18s, and F-16s, including combat missions in Iraq, where I faced enemy fire to protect our ground troops. Nowadays, I practice law, which is almost as dangerous as getting shot at for a living. Congressman David Joyce, he started here too, but then his path became a straight line to Washington, D.C., where he has been for 8 years. D.C. can change you, and for some people, it becomes all about staying there. Last December, Joyce and the rest of his party were briefed by US intel officials on how devastating and dangerous the coronavirus was about to become. But did he warn his constituents? Did he contradict his party's claim that the virus would just magically disappear when he knew that claim to be false? No. And the result? 174,000 sick Ohioans and a blow to our economy that has been devastating. A downturn that might take years for us to recover from. If Joyce thought more like an Ohioan and less like a creature of DC, he wouldn't have voted no on the HEROES Act twice, or no on the Protecting Americans with Pre-Existing Conditions Act, or no on the Lower Drug Costs Now Act, or no on the Strengthening Healthcare and Lowering Prescription Drug Costs Act, or for a tax plan that gives 85% of its benefits to the top 1% of Americans and benefits businesses who offshore labor over those who employ Americans. 60% of Ohio 14 small businesses didn't get PPP loans, but the multi-million-dollar coal company owned by Joyce's brother, located outside of our district, received over $1 million. In DC, choices like those are easy to rationalize, but here in Northeast Ohio, they're very hard to live with. I believe in public service, not self-serving politics. I want to serve you. The firefighters, the nurses, the cops, everyone risking their lives for us today. Factory workers, grocery store workers, the veterans, the teachers, the students, your parents. All of the voices who've been drowned out or paved over by the immense and revolting greed that has seized and perverted our federal government. I'm here because the people who need our country to be better, the ones who need us to have a more perfect union, for the Ohioans who thought that they were voting to drain the swamp in 2016, but now find themselves drowning in it. Now, one day, Lord willing, this pandemic will end, and America will truly begin the work of rebuilding. My hope is that on that day, we as a nation will have the courage to ask ourselves the hard questions. Why did we just lose so many Americans to the virus when our country had 2 months to prepare for what we knew was coming? More broadly, why do we spend more on healthcare than any other nation on earth for a system that fails so many people? I think when looking critically at the last 4 years, we'll also have to ask, how did we allow ourselves as Americans to be torn apart from one another on the subject of race? How did we lose pace with the rest of the world in the fight against climate chaos? Why did we not do more to protect and honor our men and women in uniform? When did we start cozying up to Russia? When did we start hating our neighbors simply because we disagreed with them on politics? And finally, where was our sole representative in Congress, David Joyce, when all of this was happening? The turbulence of the last 4 years can bring about a national conversation about who we are and what we value. If I'm in Washington, your voice will be a part of that conversation, and we can get closer to that great America we all long for. So that's our choice now, or more of the same. A sense of mission or 2 more years of special interests polluting our government. Representation or politics. My name is Hillary O'Connor Mueri, and I'm ready to serve. Thank you so very much. And I'm going to sneak in one little bit of information here at the end that's not in my prepared remarks. And it is something I learned a little less than an hour ago. Our campaign has now been officially endorsed by the next president of the United States, Joe Biden. So you are all the first to know that outside of my campaign.
Wonderful. Well, we can see why they did that, Hillary. So congratulations. So can you tell me the same question? Why should voters elect you instead of David Joyce for a different reason than what you've said in your opening statement?
Absolutely. I think that really the comparison is night and day, and it goes back to what people value. You know, I talk a lot about service. I really do believe in the concept of public service as opposed to being a politician. I'm not in this for a career. I'm in this to really truly bring representation back to this district, which I think has long been subject to just somebody going after their own whims. When you compare what we stand for, once again, it's night and day. David Joyce has a 0% rating from NARAL. I am proud to be endorsed by NARAL, Planned Parenthood, and Emily's List. David Joyce has a 10% lifetime score from League of Conservation Voters, despite all of his grandstanding about being the Great Lakes guy, where I am just very excited to help work on climate chaos issues, as well as use that as an opportunity to bring jobs and great high-paying manufacturing jobs back to Northeast Ohio and making that into a win-win situation for us. David Joyce has an A- rating from the NRA and is their endorsed candidate and takes thousands of dollars in PAC money from them. And I am proudly owning an F from the NRA, as well as a Gunson's candidate designation from Moms Demand. It goes on and on and on from that point. But I really think that in this case, we just have a really exciting opportunity to really represent the people of 14 again, instead of business as usual.
Perfect. So can you tell us what you think is the most pressing issue facing our country, and what would you do to correct it if you are elected, when you are elected to Congress? What will you do then?
You know, it's not rocket science what we need here in this district. I studied rocket science in school. This is not rocket science. We need to have affordable, accessible, and quality healthcare for all Americans. We live in the richest country on earth. We should not have our neighbors rationing their insulin in order to make ends meet. In that vein, I look forward to helping strengthen the ACA and make sure that it's expanded to include everybody. And on that front, I support a public option. We'll get the government involved as a competitor in the marketplace, and we'll use market forces to drive the costs down and lift up the quality of care. And if the private insurers can't compete, then we'll see them go out of business, and then it'll move us where we need to go. If nothing else, the COVID crisis has really brought forward the notion that health is not just for the individual, even important consideration. Health is for all of us as a society, and a healthy society is a functioning society. It's another reason that I support the program that I do, because we need to make sure that we get everybody covered as soon as possible in order to make sure we have that healthy society. When people can go and get a COVID test and not worry about whether they have to skip dinner that night, whether people can go and get that treatment without worrying about bankrupting their family, that's one of the greatest ways we're going to be able to combat this as a whole, as a society. The other side of it is jobs. As I mentioned, I grew up in a union household. Studies show when you have strong unions, you've got that rising tide that lifts all ships. Even non-union shops have better salaries and better benefits when you have union strength. So I support the PRO Act that David Joyce voted against. And as I mentioned, the environment is a great win-win situation. We can bring back green energy manufacturing, invest in that green infrastructure for our district and for our country. And it'll be great union jobs that are non-exportable, and it's just another way to help our lake and keep our environment great. And also on that front, we have biofuels that are coming, so we can support our agriculture out here in Northeast Ohio, and it goes on and on. So those are my top two, with the tertiary benefit to really focusing on the environment as well.
So David Joyce has been in Congress for a long time. Because this is the League of Women Voters Candidates Night, we can ask you questions about your opponent. And we want to know what you think that David Joyce, as a congressman, has done that has been most detrimental to Ohio in his term of service.
That's a really interesting question, and thank you for asking that. That one hasn't been asked to me before. I would have to say the most detrimental thing that David Joyce has done is break the faith of the constituents that he's supposed to serve. I'm profoundly disturbed by his campaign finances. When you go back and look, as of the last filing in June, he had $1.6 million from PACs and large individual donors. So he is almost entirely financed by people who could buy and sell you and me before breakfast. In fact, only 2.76% of his campaign finances come from anyone who's donated under $200. My campaign, we refuse to accept corporate PAC money, and the average donation to my campaign is right about $70. I think that sounds a lot more like democracy, and I feel very confident that that ensures that I can only answer to the people of Ohio's 14th. I don't answer to the special interests, and I don't answer to the corporate interests, and nobody ever has to wonder where my loyalties lie.
Thank you very much. Do we have any other questions from the Zoom audience or our audience here in the headquarters?
Just want to comment how well-spoken Hillary is, and it would be a pleasure to have her represent us and me in Washington. Thanks, Hillary.
Thank you, Glenn. I'm so honored to have your support. I really appreciate that.
And I did vote for you. I sent it in by mail today.
Oh, how wonderful. Mine's sitting on my counter. I'm going to take it in tomorrow.
You get it done, Hillary.
All right. Thank you very much, Hillary. We appreciate it. Thank you for taking the time to join us this evening. And if you want to give your website or contact information before we move on, please.
My website is HillaryO'ConnorMueri.com. It's a big mouthful. I will type it into the text box. We would love to have you stop by. You can sign up to volunteer. We're phone banking and text banking, and we could always use an extra voice or pair of thumbs.
All right. Thank you. If you want to type it in the chat, then everyone will have it. Thank you. All right. We appreciate that. So moving on, we're going to now introduce our candidate for the Ohio Senate, Betsy Rader. Needs really no introduction. Most of our audience has very familiar with Betsy and what she's been doing. She's an attorney. She is running for the 18th district for an open seat in the Ohio Senate. Her opponent is Jerry Serino. Can we all say boo hiss? And she is, it's Senator Eklund, formerly held the seat. Betsy ran for Congress 2 years ago. She did extremely well. And I think that's why all of us are so familiar with her positions and what a terrific candidate she is. So Betsy, would you like to give an opening statement, please?
Yes, and thank you so much for hosting this tonight. And I know many of you have heard me speak before, probably on multiple occasions. So let me say that as this year has gone on, I am more and more excited about serving the state legislature, particularly now that Ruth Bader Ginsburg has died. It is going to be so incredibly important that we have people in the state legislature who are willing to fight for our rights, to protect LGBTQ rights, women's reproductive freedom, and for things like pre-existing conditions that we may lose under a newly composed U.S. Supreme Court. You know, one thing that drew me to running for the state legislature was that gerrymandering is coming up next year, or getting rid of gerrymandering is coming up next year, redistricting. And we are seeing in this state that it's literally a matter of life or death for us to get rid of gerrymandering. The unfair districts have led to right-wing, anti-science extremists being in office, contesting the authority, trying to take away the authority of our Ohio Public Health Director, making it potentially impossible for us to even hire somebody to replace Dr. Amy Acton, who led us so admirably. And so it's incredibly important that we have more of a bipartisan composition to our state legislature in this coming year when we redraw the districts, so that we can return to rationality in this state and we can start prioritizing things that really matter. Things like having a good Medicaid system, having an educational system that's constitutional, and making sure that people's rights truly are protected on issues like the Fairness Act that really should be bipartisan. The Ohio Chamber of Commerce supported it. I'll be honest with you, I'm exhausted tonight. I, at 4:45 this evening, sued Jerry Serino and the Republican Senate Campaign Committee. I sued them for defamation. You may have seen the endless defamatory attack ads that they are running, attacking my really pristine and stellar record of standing up for women's rights through my whole life. And clearly they're scared. I have heard that this is the only race in the entire state of Ohio where they are running negative TV attack ads like this. And I won't stand for it. For those of you who have heard me speak, you know I grew up in poverty, that what I hated about being poor was feeling like we didn't have control over our lives. We didn't have a say in what happened to us. And that's why I worked my way through Ohio State and got a scholarship to Yale Law School, is because I wanted to empower myself and my family and other people. And today was one of those days when I'm really glad I went to law school. I'm really glad that I made a career of standing up for victims of sexual harassment and victims of discrimination and victims of child abuse. And I'm glad that today I was able to stand up for myself and not let the big money and the Republican Party drown out my voice in this election, because this is a seat we can win. It's clearly a seat we can win, or they wouldn't be behaving like this. And I really thank all of you for your support. I think this is an incredibly important year at every level of government. And I'm really excited to see people really paying attention to these state House and state Senate races. So thank you for listening to me. Thank you for all your support. And please, we are trying to get up on broadcast TV next week. We've been up on cable. We have a new ad that I'm finalizing tonight. And I'd love to have it up on every single TV station. We're on our way to having the money to do that. If you could help me out to bring that home, we can fight a fair fight for a change. And thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Betsy. So I'll ask you the same questions that we've been asking. Can you tell us, why you think you should be elected versus your opponent, and why are you running?
Well, both those questions kind of had the same answer, because I'll stand up for people. You know, I've taken a no corporate PAC pledge. I've talked about that a lot during this race, because especially with what we've seen with the HB6 scandal and bribery, and what's really happening in terms of those with the biggest checkbooks being able to control our state government. It's very important that we elect people who don't have conflicts of interest, who you can trust are representing you and not the big corporate lobbyists. We're going to do the right things for this state and not just for special interest groups. My opponent takes corporate PAC money unabashedly. I would say the other clear distinctions that really disturb me with my opponent are that he has been one of these people who has opposed Governor DeWine and Dr. Amy Acton. He called the orders in the spring home enslavement. He has consistently refused to follow government protocols on wearing masks. He also has, as a civil rights attorney, a clear distinction is that he has been a firm opponent of individual rights. As the head of Cleveland Right to Life, he took such an extreme position against gay rights that National Right to Life kicked Cleveland Right to Life out. He opposes gay people even being able to parent children. He also has been in favor and strenuously advocated for some of the most extreme anti-choice legislation. For instance, advocating that there should be no exceptions for rape or incest. And so there are a lot of clear choices between me and Jerry Serino. And I think that the differences between the two of us are meaningful to Ohio's future.
Thank you very much. So we have a question about House Bill 6. Can you tell us, when you're elected, what you think should be done about House Bill 6?
Well, I think despite the fact that they're not doing it, there appeared to be widespread agreement that it should be repealed. Really, the question is what next? And frankly, I don't think anybody has the information at this point to say what's next. The problem with HB6, in addition to the fact that it was fueled by bribery, is that they never required financial transparency. We never saw the books. And, you know, I spent a decent amount of my life as a business executive. And, you know, you usually do not invest in a company without due diligence and without seeing the books and without knowing that they have a strategic plan for long-term viability. And in this case, our state legislature handed $1.3 billion to a private company of ratepayer money without even looking at the books. And then very shortly after that money was approved, of course, they authorized an $800 million stock buyback. And on top of that, we found out that they had $61 million extra dollars for bribes. So, you know, first off, there's a significant question as to whether or not they even needed the financial assistance in order to save the jobs. Of course, this was all pitched, you know, this game that we're going to close down the plants and the jobs are all going away and your economy is going to be devastated if you don't give us this money. But we never made them prove that. You know, we just let them bully us. I shouldn't say we didn't. The people in our state legislature taking the dark money are the ones who did that. So first, we need transparency. We need to get the books open. We need to see if those plants are even in danger of closing. And if they are, you know, certainly, this is a huge, important employer. And certainly this is an important employer in Lake County. And certainly we do want energy diversity. I don't want us to go to all natural gas. But if we're going to invest in this company in some way, we need accountability. I mean, again, I know that if you're investing in a failing company, usually, for instance, you get a seat on the board. You might even get an officer position if you're going to invest $1 billion. You get some say in how that company is run, and you get some guarantees. Like, you're not going to give this money away in $800 million in stock buyback. You're going to invest this money. You're going to make sure that this is a going concern going forward, so that we're not back in the same place in 5 years and bail you out again. We need to treat this like a normal business transaction. And now we know, I mean, it was pretty obvious to most of us, frankly, last time what was really going on. But now it's clear to everybody what was really going on. And we can't repeat that process.
All right, thank you. Can you talk a little bit about what you would do in the Senate to fix school funding in Ohio? It's been declared unconstitutional for many years, and we really need to fix school funding. Do you support the Patterson Cup bill, or do you have a suggested different way to fix school funding?
I think that, one of my favorite phrases is, don't let perfection be the enemy of the good. And so when I think about the Patterson Cup bill, I think that it is better than what we have now. It is certainly a step in the right direction. Is it perfection? I don't think anybody thinks that. So what I think is that, we implement incremental change to improve things. And for instance, we address this voucher issue that I can't believe they came back and dealt with plastic bags, but didn't deal with the voucher program. But then I think we really have, just as we have to with energy policy, kind of step away from the status quo and take a fresh look and really come up with a rational energy policy. Similarly with education, we have a really, what would be the word for it? I mean, nobody understands our education funding system. It is so arcane, so difficult to even understand. And so, like, normal people can't even talk about how it works and how they would fix it. And it's not like that everywhere. I lived for a year in Connecticut, and they never heard of a school levy. So I find that people in Ohio kind of come into this with this mindset that the way we do things here for school funding, that's the framework that we have to use. And clearly, from what's been happening over the past 23 years, it's just not a good framework, So, we need to improve what we're doing now, but I think we also need to set aside those presumptions that we're even going to use this framework for how we fund schools, and look at other states and how they are doing it, and look at the best practices, and really consider implementing an entirely different structure. So I agree. I think John Patterson, of course, has done an incredible job, but I think that's just a first step.
All right, thank you. Do we have any questions from our audience here?
I do.
Oh, Richard.
I saw Betsy's cat going down the stairs. What's the cat's name?
I don't know
What is
one.
the kitty's
What color
name?
was it?
Which
Oh,
color?
there's multiple.
Which color?
Tan. It looked tan.
Tan.
Well, I have Pumpkin and Spice, who are both orange, and then I have Spot, who is black and white spotted. That's just how clever I am.
Great. Thank you. Any other questions from our Zoom audience? All right. Thank you very much, Betsy, for joining us tonight. And the information is on the chat for you to contribute to Betsy's campaign. and to get in touch with their campaign manager. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Janet.
Thank you. So now we will move on to our Ohio House candidate, Richard Dana. Richard is running to fill the seat, to be elected to the seat of John Patterson. We all know John. John's here tonight with us. Hello, John. Thank you for coming in. And we appreciate all the hard work you've done on the Cupp-Patterson bill. But Richard is, where's my biography? There we go. It's the Ohio House 99th state representative seat. He's an attorney in private practice. He was a law clerk for the 11th District Court of Appeals. He is an instructor of law and ethics at Kent State University. And his opponent is Sarah Fowler, who is currently on the State Board of Education. And we can all know about what's happened to the State Board of Education under her term. So Richard, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, Janet. Good evening, everyone. As was mentioned, my name is Richard Dana, and my wife, Marianne Cezanne, and I live in Austinburg, Ohio. I'm a lifelong resident of Northeast Ohio. And as was mentioned by numerous of our candidates, I believe both Betsy and Hillary, I received my Bachelor's of Science degree from The Ohio State University and my law degree from Case Western Reserve University School of Law. As was mentioned, my first job in the legal field was working for Judge Joseph E. Mahoney of the 11th Appellate District, first as a summer intern and then as a staff attorney. The judges of that court hear appeals, obviously in Geauga County. And I have to give a shout out here to our Court of Appeals candidates. Make sure that you vote down ballot, Cannon and Rice, please, as well as our excellent Supreme Court Justice candidates as well. I have a business background in addition to serving nearly 25 years as a practicing attorney. My wife's family owns Eddie's Grill in beautiful Geneva on the Lake, Ohio, and that's probably where most people recognize my face. Service behind the counter, cooking delicious hot dogs and hamburgers, and serving ice cold frothy root beer. I've served our area on numerous community boards. My service includes being past board chair of the Legal Aid Society of Cleveland and the Hubbard House Underground Railroad Museum. I currently serve on the University Hospitals Board, serving as board chair at 2 of our regional hospitals. And I'm proud to say that both of those hospitals are rated 5 stars out of 5 by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services for quality and patient satisfaction, which is, I think, just outstanding. It's one of the top 8% of hospitals here in the nation. In my spare time, as was mentioned, I do teach at Kent State University at Ashtabula in their criminal justice program. I also teach business law and ethics, and I love to convey my knowledge of the law to the next generation. It is through this work that I've become an accidental historian, and I continue to be amazed at the incredible people, past and present, who have called Northeast Ohio home and have sought to take the promise of America, equal justice under law, so it applies to all of our citizens. It is on my work in education that I see the culture of corruption at work in Columbus that harms our children. $600 million of your tax money was squandered when Columbus decided to fund ECOT. My local school district alone lost nearly $4 million to these failed charters. I also see a college education system where the state, for my generation, permitted me to obtain a high quality education, with the state picking up about 70% of that tab, and with me working nights and weekends to be able to pay for the rest of that cost. That same education at Ohio State would cost the average student $100,000 per year for a 4-year degree. We then saddle these students with debt, expect them to then get married, buy a home, start a family in very difficult situations here. And so our priorities in Columbus must change to better reflect our values here in Northeast Ohio. I'm endorsed by first responders such as the Fraternal Order of Police, teacher advocacy groups, the Ohio State Medical Association PAC, laborers, veterans working for Ohio, and the Farm Bureau as a friend of agriculture. I also need to give a shout out to my friend Rich, who's on the phone and is the current president of the Lake and Geauga Area Association of Realtors. Thank you for your endorsement. I will use my experience to continue advocating for us in areas of healthcare, education, including the need to extend broadband to our area, necessary for farming and our growing agritourism industry. I ask for your vote that began now and continues on until November 3rd. Thank you very much.
Much, Richard. That was great. So I would like to ask you, why should we vote for you and not for your opponent, Sarah Fowler? What do you think the Ohio legislature would look like with you in it or with her in it? What issues would come before the legislature and how would you be voting differently?
So I don't want to sit here and bash my opponent, but there is a difference here in the breadth of experience that exists between myself and my opponent. I think the biggest issue of what you have is in that area of education. I am a public school educated kid who then went to Ohio State and received an excellent education from Ohio State or from the citizens of the state of Ohio at little or no cost. My opponent doesn't have that same experience, having been homeschooled. I mentioned about the diversion of funds that have occurred here to our local school district. I mentioned how I'm on my local school board and how we lost $4 million alone just to ECOT, a failed charter school. And my opponent, just even this week, has voted to approve, additional cuts here towards public education and to fund future voucher types programs. And we've been down that road before, and frankly, we don't need to see the sequel of that. Other areas here, as far as on the breadth of experience, I am not someone who sits on my hands. When we faced a foreclosure crisis during the last financial crisis, I joined our legal aid board here from which to provide high quality legal services to those that were threatening to lose their home or could have lost their home. When we were facing an opioid crisis, I joined our local mental health and recovery services board, and I'm proud of the work that we did there from which to keep Medicaid expansion in place. Ohio saw a 25% drop in opioid deaths, and I'm proud to say in the area where I worked at here, it was even better than that. When I saw a lot of red in our local school board's balance sheet, I ran for the school board, and we passed the first operating levy, new monies, since 1993. We didn't want to do it, but we had to, based on the severe financial situation that we were facing, based on the cuts that occurred from the state. And as I mentioned here too, we're in the middle of a COVID situation here. I'm proud of my work for a local hospital system here that does focus on value. One of the criteria that we look at here is trying to cure people. We look at readmissions. We look at patient satisfaction, and that's how we are driving value here into the healthcare system. These are experiences that I have had that frankly my opponent hasn't had. And when we're facing a crisis such as what exists here currently with COVID-19, experience does matter. And that is the main reason why I ran and the reason why I'm asking for your vote. And I also just have to say, I have to continue on with the excellent work that Dr. Patterson has done, looking at a school funding situation that has been unconstitutional for 22 years, 22 years. And for the work that John has done, working in a bipartisan way here from which to fix that. We're not quite there yet, but I'm proud of the fact that I have John's endorsement here, who looked upon me as someone who could carry on his work and get the school funding situation, over the finish line. So again, thank you for the question.
Very much for the very detailed answer. Can you give us your opinion on the repeal or replacement of House Bill 6 and how you would vote in the Ohio legislature on funding First Edison and the other companies, and also your position on wind energy and other alternative forms of energy that were eliminated when House Bill 6 was passed.
Yeah, so in talking about HB 6, I mean, you're talking obviously about a piece of legislation that just got totally off track. I mean, just absolutely totally off track. When the bill is talking about we're trying to enhance clean energy and we're trying to save 2 nuclear power plants, including one that's close to our home at the Perry nuclear plant, I think it's a situation where it had good intentions in the very beginning. And then again, you see this culture of corruption that exists here, where for the allegations of $60 million, including a $500,000 vacation home in Florida, what in the heck were we doing funding coal-powered plants down on the Ohio River and also in another state? I mean, how did this just go so very, very wrong? And I think that is an indictment here about the money. This was talked about by some of our other candidates here about how money can affect what is initially sought as being good legislation that just goes way off the tracks. I'd obviously want to see what any new bill would consist of. I have serious concerns here about the closing of the Perry nuclear power plant. That does affect our area. There are 150 to 200 great paying union jobs that we have here in this area, people who work in our district but work in the Perry plant. I want to do what we can from which to save those jobs, but at the same time, we can't allow the money from which to just enact policy that is just way out of whack with what our priorities are here in Northeast Ohio.
Question on the chat about the homestead exemption. Do you think that we could get the income threshold raised so that retiring teachers could benefit from the exemption? And why do you think Columbus hasn't been focusing on the homestead tax exemption? When Governor Strickland was in, everybody got an exemption for their first $30,000 of the valuation of the property, and that was changed. Do you think that that should come back?
Yeah, I mean, I think we do need to look at how taxes are dealt with here in the state of Ohio. I will tell you that myself personally, as a business owner and running a law practice, I was given the benefit here of not having to pay income tax on the first $250,000 of the income that I made. I mean, that is outrageous. I mean, it's absolutely outrageous. And then you look about what taxes were increased, and as the question asked with respect to that homestead exemption, but look at the other taxes that have been raised with respect to the sales tax, with respect to the gas tax. We have a very regressive tax structure here in Ohio, and frankly, my belief here is that if you're doing well, you should have to pay more in the way of income taxes. I'd like to try to get us away from our dependence on property taxes. I think that hurts tremendously, especially our farmers. Even though they get certain exemptions like CAUV, they're the ones that are paying the bulk of the tax increases that we have here in Ohio. And I'm just very, very concerned with the tax shift that has occurred. Just by way of an example, last November in our county, 75 levies that were on the ballot countywide, where if you wanted police, fire, EMS, if you wanted parks, senior levies, you had to vote on taxes here for that, which were based on property taxes. And I think this whole idea from which to say that big businesses, industrialists here, they don't have to pay any tax on the first 250,000, and then we're going to sock it to everyone else. That's just not fair. It does need to be changed here in the state, certainly.
Can you tell us what you think is the most pressing issue in Ohio that, as a member of the legislature, you would be able to find a solution for.
So, I mean, I'm going to go to the education situation at first. As I mentioned here, sort of talking about my background, I had people who invested in me, and those investments enabled me to have a good job, have a good career, serve others. And I fear here with our future generations, or whether or not they're going to have the same opportunities that I had. Now, that would have been my answer. It probably still is my answer. That definitely would have been my answer pre-COVID. But the situation that we have here with COVID, you know, there are continuing concerns. It was mentioned here before, I think by Hillary earlier. There are going to be some long-standing effects that are going to exist here from COVID-19, and the fact that we were totally unprepared for that, and some decisions that were made at the top early on have really negatively impacted Main Street and some of our small businesses. And that is a definite concern that I have here, and something that we are going to have to address to try to get our economy back on track.
In the chat about free undergraduate education for low-income families. Would you be in favor of that? Is that something you would push for?
I think that's something that should definitely be considered. I will say that during my time frame here, you know, I certainly did not grow up in a household where I had a silver spoon in my mouth. I was in a situation here where I was able to, you know, work hard, have it where the state paid the bulk here of that educational need. I think that we should be looking at this here with respect to perhaps some vocational training here. I think that's something that we should be considering here. Community colleges, that should be, you know, at a lower cost or perhaps no cost. But I would want to see the legislation here before I would definitively say yay or no, you know, on that. I do believe it is important for our students to have, you know, skin in the game. But clearly, again, the priorities that we have here today with how we fund education now and how we did when I was growing up, it's far different.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for Richard Dana from our audience here at the headquarters, or anything else on Zoom?
Yeah, Janet, I hope when Dana gets to Columbus,
Can't hear you, Glenn.
I would hope that when Dana gets to Columbus, that he would work on restoring some of the local government funding that the state took back from local government, such as the personal property tax, the estate tax, and the local government funding. You know, all these things cost all of us at the local level more than what the state can provide. And they are the ones that say that we have reduced your taxes, but the burden falls greater on the local government to have to try and support their services by raising the taxes at the local level versus the state. It's a shell game, and it's kind of sickening to see.
Glenn, you're absolutely right.
Glenn, you're absolutely right. I mean, that is what's happened here. And, you know, I've seen this here with our school boards in addition to local governments. It is a tax shift that has occurred away from the state into the localities. And you know, we live in a wonderful area, a beautiful area, but we don't have the same property tax base that more, you know, wealthier areas have. And when we talk about wealthier, just about, you know, what property values are. So that is a particular burden that we have here on local governments, including the schools here with respect to our rural communities. And that's why I said, you know, last November, you know, our citizens voted in our county on 75 different tax issues. You know, 75 different tax issues. So if you want police, fire, EMS, you want good schools, you want parks, you want seniors, you want all the things that you're used to having, clearly the Columbus has said, you're going to pay for it locally. And it's unsustainable, especially for us in these more rural communities. So Glenn, I'm certainly going to be fighting for that. I'm sorry if in my answers I focused here on the education side of it, but certainly when we're talking about police protection, fire protection, schools, that shouldn't be the quality of that based on which zip code that you live in and how much your citizens can pay and the amount of property taxes, which, by the way, that system is wholly unfair here to our farmers, even with CAUV, that end up having to pay a greater percentage here of those tax increases.
I agree with you. It's a shift from local control to a more centralized government that does not serve its citizens on the same scale. Thanks, Dana.
Thank you,
Glenn. Appreciate it.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you, Richard. We appreciate all your comments. Oh, Mary, did you have a?
Good evening. I am very impressed on your credentials and commitment to this region. You will be representing a more rural area of Geauga County. What can the state do, and you, as a representative of that area, do to help the low-income people and the farmers that have been impacted by this current administration in Washington from Ohio? How can you help them, sir?
Yeah, I mean, I think that. But I want to also talk about another issue that I think is extremely important here for us in the rural communities, and that deals with broadband issues. Okay? We faced a situation here with COVID here, and I'll just say from the hospital situation, from the school situation, how do you go to your medical appointments? How do you go to school? And we had to go into this online format, and there were certain areas of our communities that had access to reliable and affordable broadband, but that certainly wasn't the case here in our most rural communities. Can you hear me?
So I don't know, can you hear me? Sorry, we could hear before. So the concern here is about having the broadband here in our more rural communities. And I think that's going to take an investment here with respect to the state of Ohio, because again, your access to healthcare, your access to education, it shouldn't be based on what zip code that you live in, and also whether or not you have access to reliable and affordable broadband. So those are a couple of the areas here that I would be definitely fighting for here down in Columbus here for our more rural communities here in Ashtabula and Geauga counties. Thank you. I thank you for the question and the support. I appreciate it.
All right, thank you very much, Richard. All right, we have no other questions. We will move on to our 11th District Court of Appeals candidates. I see that both Cynthia Rice and Judge Cannon are on our call. So we will start this evening with Judge Cynthia Rice, who currently is our appeals court judge on the 11th District Court of Appeals. And she's been on the court since 2003. And we are very pleased that she has been able to serve on the 11th District Court of Appeals. So Cindy, would you tell us a little bit about your background and give us a little history on why you're running to be reelected to this position?
Certainly. Thank you, and welcome. It's good to see everyone tonight on Zoom. For the past 18 years, I've been on the Court of Appeals. In addition to that, I've sat on the Ohio Supreme Court, and I am currently the Chief Judge of the Ohio Court of Appeals Judges Association. So I represent all the Court of Appeals judges in the state of Ohio. I also sit on the Ohio Judicial Conference Executive Committee, and I am co-chair of the Criminal Law and Procedure Committee. And what the Judicial Conference does is the goal is to improve the judiciary from within. We also work with the legislature as far as doing impact statements, doing research, making recommendations on changes in the law that may be needed. My committee specifically works with criminal law, and so if we have a proposal that's being floated through the House, we may have input and tell them, how we think it could be a better bill if we change it, or making sure that everything's constitutional, because so much of when statutes are challenged, the first place they're challenged is at the Court of Appeals. So that's where we see it. And it's nice being on the Criminal Law and Procedure Committee, because I know what's coming down the pike and I see it ahead of time before it becomes law, and know kind of if there's going to be some problems where it's going to arise. And I sit as co-chair of the Criminal Law and Procedure Committee because for 12 years I was a criminal prosecutor. I was the assistant United States attorney in Youngstown, where I tried cases in all the federal courts in the northeast part of Ohio, in Akron, Cleveland, and Youngstown. And before that, I was the first assistant in the Trumbull County Prosecutor's Office. So I tried all high-profile cases: capital murder, rape, any type of case that had victims that were high profile. So I spent a lot of time in the courtroom. I spent a lot of time one-on-one with victims and with law enforcement. And because of that, the Fraternal Order of Police for Western Lake County has endorsed me, recognizing that my experience is an asset and that I know behind the scenes what goes on with some of these cases. The Court of Appeals is a little bit different than what people think of when they think of a trial court. We know what a court is because we see it on TV, we see it in movies. But generally those are trials that have juries and witnesses. But at the Court of Appeals, we only handle legal issues. And so we don't have witnesses. No juries are there. The cases are decided by a panel of 3 judges. We have 5 judges on the Court of Appeals in the 11th District, and we serve 5 counties, Geauga, but also Lake, Portage, Ashtabula, and Trumbull counties. So the only people who come before us are predominantly attorneys, and they are arguing the law and about what happened in the lower court. We hear appeals from every trial court in our 5 counties. And so I think, who really understands and knows who are the good judges on the Court of Appeals would be the attorneys. And for that reason, I'm very proud to say that I received outstanding recommendations and approval from the bar associations throughout the district. There was a poll done in Geauga County, and 88% of the attorneys in Geauga County voted me to be either recommended or highly recommended. Lake County, I was highly recommended by the Lake County Bar, and in Trumbull County, I was the preferred candidate, with 88% of the attorneys voting for me. And it's significant, the Trumbull County Bar, because my opponent's from Trumbull County, and she's also known there as an attorney. All the attorneys know her and have practiced with her. So for all the attorneys who voted, she received 13 votes and I received 109. So I'm very proud of that. I think it reflects on people knowing my reputation for honesty, integrity, and hard work. The Plain Dealer likewise has recommended and endorsed my candidacy based upon my experience and reputation. I think that that it's important for voters to know that at the Court of Appeals, we're kind of like legal minds. I mean, we're kind of academic in what we do. So it's important that we have the experience. I've heard over 4,000 cases in the appellate court and written close to 1,500 opinions. So I've got the experience. We see everything from a stop sign violation to an aggravated murder case. We see minor contract disputes to lease problems to class action lawsuits that involve many, many people and lots of money. So I've pretty much seen anything and everything that can come before the Court of Appeals in the last 18 years. And that experience is based upon all the recommendations from the Plain Dealer, the FOP, and the bar associations is what voters should look for when they choose to vote for the Court of Appeals judge. If you'd like to know more about me, you can go to votejudgerice.com. You can follow me on Facebook, Judge Cynthia Rice, like my page, spread the word. It's kind of, because we don't do trials, we're not really in the forefront of the newspaper, or, we don't get a lot of publicity at what we do at the Court of Appeals. So letting people know that you know something about a candidate would be helpful, and I would appreciate your vote on November 3rd or earlier if possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Judge Rice. I'd like to ask you, do you believe that judges should recuse themselves from cases? And if so, when and why?
Well, every case that comes before the Court of Appeals is reviewed by each of us for whether or not we have a conflict. And yes, judges should recuse themselves if there's anything about the case or any of the parties involved that would prevent you from not only being impartial, but also having the appearance of impartiality. So I don't sit on any of my cases, my husband's cases. There are cases that I automatically recuse myself from because of a personal connection I may have with an attorney. If I had any personal connection with a party, I would likewise recuse myself, because I don't want to be in a position where my decision is going to be questioned as to whether or not did you vote that way because it's the right thing or because you're influenced by your relationship or association. So judges do recuse themselves, and it's the right thing to do. I know if I in my heart feel like I can't look that person in the eye, then I think I should get off the case, because I don't want to, in any way, impede my impartiality.
Thank you very much. Can you give us an example of a ruling you made as a judge on the 11th District Court of Appeals that affected Ohio for the better?
I would like to think that every case that we decide affects Ohio for the better, because what we do is we make sure that the trial courts are following the law and that everything's being done properly. So I think everything that we handle, if there's error, we reverse and remand to the lower court to correct it, whether they retry it, dismiss the case, or change the outcome. So I think that everything we do affects all of our, absolutely everyone, because then we make sure that the next time that issue comes before another court, they get it right.
Do you have any questions here from our headquarters for Judge Rice?
Judges don't affect policy. We don't make policy, and we can't really talk about a lot of these issues. I love listening to the other candidates because I feel their passion, and as a judge, the passion we have is for the law and making sure that everything is fair and impartial and everyone gets a fair shake when they come to the court. But that's kind of not real exciting.
Thank you very much. All right. Judge Cannon. So Judge Cannon is also serving on the 11th District Court of Appeals. He is running for re-election. Judge Cannon was appointed to the court in 2007. Little known fact, I was one of the people that was part of the group that recommended that Judge Cannon be appointed to that seat when Judge Bill O'Neill stepped down. So I think that he has great history here on the court. It's from Lake County. And would you like to give a brief introduction, please, Judge Cannon?
Thank you, Jen. I, first of all, want to thank you for putting all this together. This is a great opportunity for us to say a few things about our candidacies, and, in particular for Judge Rice and some of the other candidates who have multi-county races. It's just a wonderful opportunity in this environment to get our position and our statements about our qualifications and background out in front of everybody. I have been on the Court of Appeals, as you said, since 2007. It's my 14th year now. And prior to that, I was a lawyer in Lake County for 27 years. I am married. My wife and I just celebrated our 40th wedding anniversary, and we just welcomed our third grandchild to the world. It's been a great month for us. This is a strange election in many, many ways, and I've said often, there's no more strange race than the one I'm in, because my opponent is already a judge on our court. My opponent is Matt Lynch, and for many of you, I probably don't need to say anything more, but he can't lose this because he'll be a judge on our court whether he wins or loses his election. But if he were to win it, I would be replaced by some unknown person who would get appointed to his seat. So that's the issue in this race. It's the question between me and some unknown person. And my opponent's been very clear about his motives here. He wants an extra 2 years on our court. He's too old to run for his seat again. And if he's elected, he gets an extra 2 years. I would tell you, if you don't know really how to judge who the best candidate would be in a judicial race, look to some independent sources. And the first thing I would tell you the first thing is, like Judge Rice said, there's only been one FOP endorsed in these races, and we have both been endorsed by the FOP resoundingly. The second thing is, the bar associations, they don't do these judicial polls for the attorneys, and they don't do them for the judges. They do these judicial polls so the voters know who the attorneys believe are the best candidates. And in Lake County, I was highly recommended. My opponent was not rated at all. He was actually, his rating in Portage County was not recommended. And I received a highly recommended rating there. In Trumbull County, like Judge Rice, I didn't do quite as well as her, but the preference in Trumbull County was 101 to 19. But the most interesting one of all to me was the Geauga County judicial poll, which just came out last week or the week before. But that's my opponent's home county. And in Geauga County, the lawyers voted my candidacy highly recommended. They said I was highly recommended by 65 attorneys. He was highly recommended by 3. Now, keep in mind, he's a member of the Geauga County Bar. In the not recommended category, I got 1 vote. My opponent got 63 not recommended votes. And the important thing there is the next highest number for not recommended of the 8 judicial candidates was in the 30s. He got more than double the not recommended votes of anybody else. So there's something going on there. I really didn't know my opponent before he became a judge. He's been a judge on our court for a little over a year and a half. But certainly you need to pay attention to what the attorneys think about who the best candidate is. The other thing is, my work's been recognized by the Ohio Supreme Court in the past 13 years. I think I'm the only appellate judge in the state of Ohio that's been appointed to serve as an associate justice when a justice had to recuse themselves by 3 different chief justices. And they've also asked me to come down and help train the new appointed judges in the new judge orientation for the appellate track. There's 68 appellate judges in the state of Ohio, and every 2 years there's a new group of appellate judges that come in. And I got to say, in 13 years, I've got a long track record. The attorneys, I believe, obviously appreciate the work I've done. And I believe the reason they appreciate it is because I don't have an agenda. I make a decision based on the case before me without regard to what it's going to look like in the newspaper or anything like that. My opponent's out there saying that he's the conservative candidate and he's the one that's going to defend the Constitution. And, the reality is I don't believe judges should be out there announcing any type of predilection for how they are going to vote on a case. When you announce what kind of a person you are, that suggests that you're going to rule in a certain way on certain cases. And I will not do that. I will rule on a case based on the record before us and what the law is that applies to that record. So I would appreciate your support. The biggest concern I have in this is my opponent has a source of money. He got a $25,000 contribution from who he says is a family member in Texas. And he's saying that we shouldn't take any money from attorneys. Well, that's not much of a sacrifice for him to not take money for attorneys because he doesn't have much support from the legal community. And all of these supports that Judge Rice and I have from all of the bar associations and the plain dealer, my concern is that we're is not necessarily getting out there. So if you have friends on Facebook and you can share with them the overwhelming support that Judge Rice and I have from the legal community, please do that, because in this environment, it's different. This is my third reelection, and it's the strangest of all. We certainly would appreciate any help you can give in sharing information about finishing off the bottom of the ballot for the good judges in your district. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We certainly appreciate the time that you've taken and your candor in answering our questions. Does anyone in the audience here at the headquarters have a question for Judge Cannon? Okay, I do see a question here, a statement. They're asking on the chat if the judges could make a message, simple message that we could post on Facebook or share on social media or have for our friends. So if there's anything that your campaigns can put up on Facebook that we can share and get the message out, you can do that either through the chat here or send it to us, and we will make sure that it gets distributed through the Geauga Dems database and the Twitter accounts. So they're looking for some, snappy campaign pointers. Okay.
That's a great request. We'll try to get some information over to you.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Judge Cannon. And now we have our candidate, Garrett Westhoven, for the House District 76. This is a very controversial race. Garrett's opponent is Representative Diane Grindell, who was appointed to the seat. And we know that he has an excellent platform, and he would be a wonderful replacement for Representative Grindell. He is a software engineer for a very large business, and he has lived in Geauga County for a while and has two very small, beautiful small children that we enjoy seeing at the headquarters and out on the campaign trail. So Garrett, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Sure. Thank you very much for having me, and thank you for hosting this. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Garrett Westhoven, and I am the Democratic candidate for State House District 76. As Janet mentioned, I've got two small children, a 5-year-old son and a 17-month-old daughter. And I've got 15 years of experience as a web developer. And one of the reasons I'm running for office is to bring my technical expertise to the State House and help lead Ohio to the 21st century. I'll pause for a moment and just say that if any of you have lost friends or family to the coronavirus, you have my heartfelt sympathies. And I know it's something that a lot of us are working through these hard times right now. Speaking to you via Zoom is a stark reminder of the pandemic we're all living through, and underscores the need to make sure that everyone has access to a high-speed, affordable broadband. Whether your kids have been forced to attend school online or you're now working from home for the foreseeable future, the need for everyone to have access to a high-speed, affordable connection to the internet has become critical. Building out that infrastructure necessary to handle that is something we can't wait on any longer. I think we need to set up a public-private partnership to ensure that everyone in Ohio has access to a high-speed, affordable connection. Next thing I'd like to discuss, as many of the other candidates had, is education. In 1997, the Supreme Court of Ohio determined that the system through which we fund our public schools is unconstitutional. 20 years later, we still haven't properly addressed this. And it's time for us to end a system that bases education on developmentally inappropriate tests that only reflect the income of the local community and not the skill of the teachers or the quality of the school district. Also, public funds should fund public schools full stop. Our voucher programs siphon funds from already underfunded districts and lines of pockets of corporations who are pulling from the same pool of teachers that public schools do, but are outside the same system requirements that we hold our public schools to. This underfunding has made teaching during the pandemic, which would have been challenging in the best of circumstances, even harder than it used to be. Finally, I'd like to discuss governing philosophy. I'm here because I want to represent everyone in my district and not just those from one party. I also want to make decisions based upon the best data available, and I want to make sure that I'm available to respond to the needs of my constituents. I want to help us govern for the real world and not a cable news bubble. Like, we're in the middle of a global pandemic, whether it be that or the myriad of other problems facing our state. We need to legislate for that reality. We're likely to lose a congressional seat in the redistricting process because an insufficient number of people are staying and coming into our state. We need policies that encourage our children to stay here and people in industries to come here. We could choose to become a leader, or we could choose to cling to industries that the world is turning its back on, or that are being automated away. I want to be a representative because I think Ohio could lead and create new resilient jobs that will last for decades, and I want to help us get there. Thank you for tuning in. My name is Garrett Westhoven, and I hope to have your vote on or before November 3rd.
Thank you very much, Garrett. Can you tell us why you are uniquely qualified to replace Representative Grindell in the 76th district?
I think what makes me uniquely qualified is that it is my engineering background. If we are going to create new jobs, new 21st century jobs, I think we need someone who understands, what we need in terms of the, digital infrastructure to get us there. What attracts young people to come to the state. What types of education we need to focus on. Obviously we've had a lot of talk about education tonight, but it's not just a K through 12. It's not just college either. It's trade schools, it's community colleges. I do in the coding industry. There's a lot of developers that are coming out of what are called boot camps, which are basically one semester intense courses that they cost $12,000 to $15,000, which sounds a little bit expensive, but the entry level salary for a software developer in Northeast Ohio is about $60,000 a year. So if you have access to a computer, that can be a huge leg up to getting an in-demand job right now. I know a lot of people have been lost jobs or are struggling to get by right now, but the software industry has done just fine, and it actually has probably expanded during this pandemic because everyone needs software to keep going right now. So I think, if we are going to have a modern economy, I think I'm uniquely qualified to help us get there because I know a lot of the digital and technical aspects to help us get there.
All right, thank you. Can you tell me what you would do to fix school funding in Ohio? And is that a priority issue for you?
Yes, school funding is absolutely a priority issue for me. For us to fix our school funding, I think we need to overhaul our tax structure. I know it's been mentioned before, but we have an over-reliance on sales tax and property taxes. Our system, because we don't, we let some of the richest among us, not have to pay, that much income tax, that, forces our taxes, on our local communities, on our property taxes. And on sales tax, which, if you're paying a sales tax, if you make $100,000 a year or $20,000 a year and you buy the same essentials, that sales tax hurts that, $20,000, $30,000 a year person a lot more than that $100,000 a year person. So if we go and shift our tax burden towards an income tax, our tax revenue can probably stay more or less the same or go up. And that makes it much easier to actually start appropriately funding our school systems, along with many other things within our state.
Okay. What do you see as the most serious problem facing Ohio today? And as a state legislator, what would you do to fix it?
Well, the most serious problem is probably appropriately responding to the pandemic, in the emergency media response. We have been, obviously hurt. We're having jobless claims are, quite high still. They've come down a little bit from their peak, but they've started to go back up again. And making sure there are steps we could take to help us get through this. And right now, I'm running against someone whose solution to the problem is just open everything up and it'll all be fine. Like the pandemic has gone away. And there's a chance that might have some short-term impact, but all you have to do is look around at various countries or various states, like North Dakota, for instance, like they're running out of hospital beds right now. And we thankfully haven't had that, because I certainly have some criticisms of how Governor DeWine has handled it, but we're doing pretty good as a state, at least in terms of making sure, our hospitals are not, being not overflowing. But instead of if we did just open up, we would be in that situation. So what we need to do is like help our small businesses and stuff get through this, have some low interest loan that, allows them to, maybe upgrade their HVAC system so they can, have something that can cycle air more quickly, so it can be safer to breathe if you want to go out to a restaurant or a bar, create some sort of barriers if you want to like have, your cashiers or something be safe when people come into the store. All these things cost a lot of money, and businesses are hurting for money right now. So, we could choose to do something to help us get through this, for, and it might go on for another year, because we don't know. Obviously, there's vaccines in the pipeline, but they might not be entirely effective. So we could choose to try and do something to help businesses get by, or we could sit here and just, hope that they figure it out. So I think we need to take steps to help our small businesses get by, and not just, pretend like everything is okay and open it up like that's going to make everything okay.
All right. We have a question on the chat about the STRS and the lack of increase in the COLA accounts. Your opponent, Representative Grindell, indicated that she would look into this. There was some irregularities. Nothing has been done. Is there anything that you think should be done, or are you familiar with the situation?
I'm not deeply familiar with the situation. I am loosely familiar with the situation. Any pension plan should be able to, appropriately compensate for any cost of living adjustment or something like that. And, we need to make sure that, as time marches on, that, we want to make sure that, as, we have a huge budget, like we know the state's going to have a huge budget crunch right now. We need to make sure that that money is protected, and that, those people, our retirees are, that pension is critical to them. Like they don't have some other source of income typically that they can rely on. So, Social Security has, standard cost of living adjustments that go up over time, and, the pensions need to do the same thing. And that's part of when you sign up to work as a state worker, you're frequently not necessarily paid a glamorous salary, but, part of the social contract we have with our state workers is that when it's time for them to retire, that they have a good, strong, safe pension for them that's going to be there, and it's going to handle the situation we need. And if we don't properly fund that and make sure that, those cost of living adjustments go up with time, then we fail to hold our contract for state workers. And that's only going to hurt us long term, because anyone who's a younger person who might be interested in getting into state government and trying to do the good groundwork that a lot of our state and local employees have done, then that's going to be less attractive to them, and we're not going to get the talent that we need to just make our state run and our government function. And is a huge long-term problem. So if we don't take care of our retirees, then we're not going to get the young talent in the door to help take care of our state.
You mentioned the COVID crisis. Representative Grindell has, I believe, signed on to or initiated a bill to impeach Governor DeWine, and also, as you said, to open up the state fully to limit the powers of our health director. I'm assuming that you do not agree with those positions and would not be in favor of impeaching Governor DeWine. Do you think that we have handled the health crisis as good as we should have, or is there something that you would like to see us do in the future?
I don't think we have done it as good as we could have, but we've done a pretty good job. We've done better than a lot of states, particularly states that have, Republican government up and down. For instance, like in states like Texas and North Dakota, for instance, which have now, both had instances where they've run out of hospital space. Arizona too is another example of this. Thankfully, we have not been in that situation. That's part of because Governor DeWine has, in general, listened to Dr. Amy Acton when she was here and tried to, follow the science for the most part. I think we should have mandated masks much sooner than we should have. we have a huge rainy day fund. To the best of my knowledge, we have yet to touch. And I don't know what kind of rainier day we could possibly be looking for than the greatest economic catastrophe since the Great Depression. So, there's things like, say school funding, for instance. Like every school right now across the state, they're doing hybrid models, or kids are going some days and not others. And, we're trying to figure out ways to make space in their classrooms. These are all things that, like, we have an underfunded school system, and yet, to try and figure out the best way to handle our teaching during a global pandemic, we haven't touched our rainy day fund. Like, that rainy day fund could be used for so many different things, and we have yet to touch it. So there's a lot more that we could be doing. I think comparatively speaking, he's done okay. I would give him like a B-, but that leaves a lot of room for improvement.
Thank you very much, Garrett. Do we have any questions from our audience here at the headquarters? Anything else from our Zoom audience? Well, thank you very much to all of our candidates and all of our participants for joining us this evening. We ran a little bit over, but we hope that you learned a lot more about your candidates tonight. If you are interested in a sample ballot, they're up on the Democratic Party website. And if you want to know about any more of our candidates, we hope that you will email them. Their contact information is in the chat, and it's also up on our website. So thank you very much for participating. And please, please take 2 or 3 friends to the polls and make sure everyone votes and votes early. Have a good night. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you.